David left me because of my failures, saying he deserved someone better. For a whole year, he thought I was small and worthless, but what he found out destroyed him completely. You guys, I'm literally shaking as I type this because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely insane. My hands can barely stay steady on the keyboard. But here's the thing. What David discovered about me 1 year later wasn't just shocking. It was life-destroying. And what happened 3 days after he found out? I still can't believe the irony of how everything unfolded. But I can't tell you the biggest bombshell yet, because what happened exactly 2 weeks after our final confrontation will make you question everything you think you know about success, failure, and how the universe really works. You need to hear this story in order because every detail connects to something massive that I'm saving for the very end. Let me start from the beginning because this story gets absolutely wild. David and I had been married for 4 years when everything started falling apart. We met in college, both studying business, and honestly, I thought we were perfect together. He was ambitious, driven, always talking about his big plans for the future. I was more creative, dreamy, the type who believed everything would work out somehow. After graduation, David landed this great job at a consulting firm, making serious money right away. Meanwhile, I was struggling to find my place in the world. I tried marketing, then graphic design, then freelance writing. Nothing seemed to stick. I'd get jobs and lose them, start projects that never took off, chase dreams that led nowhere. David was supportive at first. When I got fired from my marketing job after 6 months, he told me it was their loss. When my freelance design business failed, he said I was just learning what didn't work. When I spent 3 months writing a novel that no agent wanted to represent, David said maybe fiction wasn't my calling. But here's what I didn't know then. And this connects to why David's life became a living nightmare exactly 1 year later. There was something about my so-called failures that David never understood. Something that would make him realize he'd been living with a woman who wasn't who he thought she was at all. By our 3rd year of marriage, David's patience was wearing thin. He'd come home from his successful job to find me in sweatpants, working on another project that he was sure would fail like all the others. I could see the disappointment in his eyes when friends asked what I did for work, and I'd give some vague answer about being between opportunities. The comments started small. David would make little jokes about my work ethic, suggest that maybe I needed to be more realistic about my abilities. When I'd get excited about a new idea, he'd ask if I'd thought about the practical aspects, the likelihood of success, whether this was really the best use of my time. But here's what David never knew, and this is where the story gets absolutely crazy. Every single one of those failures he witnessed wasn't actually a failure at all. I was deliberately sabotaging myself, and there was a reason for it that's so twisted, so calculated, that when he found out, it broke his mind completely. 6 months before David finally snapped, something happened that changed everything. But I can't tell you what it was yet, because it's connected to something that occurred just last month that will blow your mind. You need to understand how deep David's cruelty went before you can appreciate the justice that was coming for him. The breaking point came on our 4th wedding anniversary. We were at dinner at this fancy restaurant David had chosen, and he was telling me about his latest promotion while I shared news about a potential writing opportunity. David listened with this expression I'd never seen before. Not just disappointment, but actual disgust. When David started talking, he said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage. He told me he loved me, but couldn't handle watching me fail at everything I tried. David said he needed a partner who was as driven and successful as he was, someone who could match his ambitions. But here's the part that destroyed me. David looked me straight in the eyes and said he deserved someone better. He told me I was a dreamer who would never accomplish anything real, and that my constant failures were embarrassing him in front of his colleagues and friends. David said he wanted a divorce. He'd already talked to a lawyer about how to divide our assets, which was basically just his assets, since I'd never contributed anything substantial to our household income. When I started crying and begging him to reconsider, David said maybe if I could prove I was capable of real success, we could work things out. But he doubted that would happen. I was devastated. For 4 years, I'd thought David loved and supported me despite my struggles. Finding out that he'd been judging me the entire time, that he saw me as a failure and an embarrassment, shattered everything I believed about our relationship. David moved into the guest room that night and filed for divorce the next week. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but I knew what he really meant. I wasn't good enough for him anymore. The next year was the hardest of my life. I moved into a tiny studio apartment that was all I could afford. I took a part-time job at a coffee shop to pay rent. David kept our house, our friends, our entire life together. I felt like a complete failure, exactly like he'd said I was. But here's what David didn't know, and this is where the story takes the most insane twist you've ever heard. During that entire year, when he thought I was struggling and failing, I was actually executing the most elaborate plan I'd ever conceived. A plan that had been in motion since long before our divorce, and David had no idea what was coming for him. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about the woman David married. But I can't reveal the full truth yet, because what happened when he finally discovered who I really was, that's the part that will haunt you. First update. You guys have been messaging me nonstop asking what my plan was, and honestly, I'm still processing how perfectly everything worked out. But before I tell you about the elaborate scheme I'd been running, I need to drop this bombshell that makes everything David did to me 10 times worse. Remember how I mentioned that something happened 6 months before David finally snapped? Here's what it was. I inherited $23 million from my grandmother. My grandmother had been this eccentric woman who'd made a fortune in real estate investments. She'd always been secretive about her wealth, living modestly despite being worth tens of millions. When she died, she left everything to me in a trust that wouldn't be accessible until I turned 30. But here's the insane part. David never knew about the inheritance. My grandmother had made me promise not to tell anyone, including my husband, until the money was officially mine. She wanted to see who would love me for myself, not for what I might inherit someday. So during those years when David was criticizing my lack of financial success, I was sitting on a secret fortune that would have solved every problem he claimed we had. When he said I was embarrassing him with my failures, I was actually about to become wealthier than he could ever dream of being. But here's what's even more twisted. I'd been deliberately failing at everything because I wanted to see how David would treat me when he thought I was worthless. Every job I lost, every project that failed, every disappointment, I'd been sabotaging myself on purpose to test his character. And David had failed that test spectacularly. The inheritance became available 3 months after our divorce was finalized. $23 million, just sitting there waiting for me. But I didn't touch it immediately. I had a different plan. I used a small portion of the money to hire the best private investigator in the city. I wanted to know everything about David's life since our divorce, who he was dating, where he was working, what he was telling people about our marriage. What the PI discovered was so much worse than I could have imagined. But I'm not ready to tell you that part yet, because it connects to something David did just 2 weeks ago that made me realize how much he truly deserved what was coming for him. Here's what I can tell you. David had been lying about our entire marriage, not just to me, but to everyone he knew. The story he was telling his friends and colleagues about why we got divorced was completely fabricated, and it involved making me out to be something I definitely wasn't. But that wasn't even the worst part. David had started dating someone new, a woman who worked at his company, and he was treating her exactly the same way he'd treated me. Criticizing her ambitions, undermining her confidence, making her feel like she wasn't good enough for him. That's when I decided David didn't just deserve to lose me. He deserved to lose everything. The plan I came up with was so elaborate, so perfectly calculated, that I'm still amazed I had the patience to pull it off. But I knew that to truly destroy David, I couldn't just reveal that I was rich. I had to make him realize that everything he thought he knew about success, failure, and worth was completely wrong. So I disappeared. Second update. I know that sounds dramatic, but hear me out. Using my inheritance, I created an entirely new identity. I moved to New York, got a makeover that completely transformed how I looked, and launched a business using a different name. The business was in tech consulting, the same industry where David worked, but on a much larger scale. Within 6 months, using my financial resources and some truly brilliant advisors I'd hired, my company was landing major contracts and making headlines in industry publications. But here's the beautiful part. I made sure David would hear about my success without knowing it was me. I changed my appearance so dramatically that even people who'd known me for years wouldn't recognize me. I was using my middle name and grandmother's maiden name as my business identity. While David thought his ex-wife was struggling in some tiny apartment, working at a coffee shop and failing at everything she touched, I was actually building a multi-million-dollar empire that was revolutionizing his entire industry. The tech consulting firm I founded developed this revolutionary software that completely changed how companies approach digital transformation. Within 8 months, we had contracts with Fortune 500 companies, partnerships with major tech giants, and a valuation that put us among the fastest-growing startups in the country. But I wasn't done with David yet. Remember how I mentioned that the PI discovered something terrible about how David was treating his new girlfriend? Here's where that becomes important. David's new girlfriend was named Claire, and she worked in marketing at his consulting firm. The PI found out that David was using the exact same playbook on her that he'd used on me, undermining her confidence, criticizing her work, making her feel like she was lucky to be with someone as successful as him. But Claire was different from me in one crucial way. She actually was struggling professionally. She was genuinely having trouble at work, getting poor performance reviews, and David was making everything worse by constantly telling her she wasn't good enough. That's when I decided to save Claire while simultaneously destroying David. I approached Claire's company about hiring their marketing team for a massive campaign. The contract was worth more than their entire annual revenue. But I had one specific requirement. I wanted to work directly with Claire on the project. Claire had no idea who I really was, but working with me completely transformed her career. I mentored her, taught her advanced strategies, helped her develop campaigns that were so successful they won industry awards. Within 3 months, Claire went from being on the verge of getting fired to being promoted to senior marketing director. Meanwhile, David was watching his girlfriend succeed beyond his wildest dreams while having no idea that his failure ex-wife was the one making it happen. But that still wasn't enough revenge for me. I wanted David to face a reckoning that would destroy not just his relationship, but his entire sense of self-worth. That's when I decided to reveal who I really was. The revelation happened at the industry's biggest annual conference. Both David and Claire were there representing their company. I was there as the keynote speaker, the mysterious founder of the tech consulting firm that had taken the industry by storm. When they announced my name at the conference, David was sitting in the third row. I walked onto that stage, looked directly at him, and watched his face go from confusion to recognition to absolute horror. For the first time in over a year, David was seeing his ex-wife, the woman he'd called a failure and an embarrassment, being introduced as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in his field. But the real shock came when I started my presentation. I told the story of how I'd built my company, how I'd overcome obstacles and turned failures into learning experiences. Then I shared something that made David's blood run cold. I talked about how important it is to have a partner who believes in you during difficult times. I mentioned that I'd once been married to someone who saw my struggles as failures instead of growth opportunities, and how that experience had taught me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who only loves what you can do for them. The audience loved the personal touch, but David looked like he was going to pass out. He was realizing that during our entire marriage, I'd been capable of success beyond anything he'd ever achieved. He'd left me because he thought I was worthless, but I'd actually been the most valuable thing in his life. After my presentation, David tried to approach me, but I had security escort him away. I wasn't ready to speak to him yet. I had one more surprise waiting. Final update. You guys, what happened next was so satisfying that I still get chills thinking about it. David spent the next week trying to contact me through every possible channel. Phone calls, emails, showing up at my company's offices, even reaching out to my family members. He left dozens of voicemails alternating between apologies and demands for explanations. David said he couldn't understand why I'd hidden my wealth and abilities from him. He claimed that if he'd known how successful I could be, he never would have divorced me. That's when I realized David still didn't get it. He thought my worth was tied to my money and success. He couldn't comprehend that he'd failed as a husband, not because I was unsuccessful, but because he'd never loved me for who I actually was. So I decided to teach him one final lesson. I arranged a meeting with David and Claire together. I told them I had a business proposition that involved both of them. They met me at the penthouse office of my company, a space that cost more per month than David's entire annual salary. When they arrived, I could see David was still in shock. He kept staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. Claire was confused but professional, not understanding the personal history between David and me. I started by congratulating Claire on her recent successes and telling her about a job opportunity at my company that would triple her salary and give her equity in a billion-dollar business. Claire was thrilled, but David looked sick. Then I turned to David. I told him I'd been watching his career since our divorce, and I'd noticed that his performance at work had been declining. His boss had been questioning whether David was the right fit for the company's new direction. I said I could help him if he was interested. David eagerly asked what kind of help I was offering. That's when I smiled and told him I was buying his company. The acquisition had been in the works for months. My firm was purchasing David's consulting company as part of our expansion into traditional business consulting. The deal was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and it would be announced the next week. I explained to David that as the new owner, I'd be restructuring the company and eliminating positions that didn't add value. Unfortunately, his role was one of those being eliminated. David started panicking, asking if there was anything he could do to keep his job. He offered to take a pay cut, accept a demotion, anything to stay with the company. That's when I delivered the final blow. I told David that I'd actually created a new position that might be perfect for him, assistant to the head of marketing. He'd be reporting directly to Claire, helping her with basic administrative tasks and learning about what real success looks like from someone who'd earned it. The look on David's face when he realized I was offering him a job working for his girlfriend, the same girlfriend whose career I'd built while he was tearing her down, was absolutely priceless. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out a folder and showed David documentation of everything I discovered about how he'd been treating Claire. The private investigator had recorded conversations where David criticized her work, undermined her confidence, and made her feel worthless. Exactly like he'd done to me. I told Claire that she deserved to know how her boyfriend really felt about her abilities and potential. When she heard the recordings of David calling her incompetent and saying she was lucky he was willing to date someone so unsuccessful, she was devastated. Claire quit dating David immediately. She also accepted the position at my company, where she's now thriving as one of our top executives. As for David, he was forced to choose between unemployment and working as an assistant for the woman he'd emotionally abused. He took the job because he couldn't afford not to, but his pride was completely destroyed. Every day, David has to watch Claire succeed in ways he told her she never could. Every day, he's reminded that his ex-wife built an empire while he was calling her a failure. Every day, he faces the consequences of valuing success over character, money over love, and status over genuine human connection. The last I heard, David was still working in that assistant role, making a fraction of what he used to earn, and living in a studio apartment because he can't afford anything better. Meanwhile, Claire got promoted again and is now dating a wonderful man who supports her ambitions instead of tearing them down. As for me, I've never been happier. My company is valued at over $2 billion now. I've helped dozens of women like Claire discover their potential and escape relationships with men who don't deserve them. And I wake up every day knowing that I chose character over convenience when it mattered most. People ask me if I feel guilty about what I did to David. The answer is absolutely not. David showed me who he really was when he thought I had nothing to offer him. He chose to be cruel instead of supportive, dismissive instead of encouraging. He decided my worth was based on my achievements rather than my character. I just made sure he experienced the same judgment he'd inflicted on others. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just showing someone exactly who they are when they think no one important is watching. David thought he was trading up when he left me for someone he considered more successful. Instead, he traded away the most valuable relationship he'd ever have, and he'll spend the rest of his life knowing it. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Sometimes justice requires patience, planning, and the financial resources to make sure the truth comes out in the most spectacular way possible. Sometimes the best response to someone calling you a failure is to succeed so completely that they spend the rest of their lives regretting they ever doubted you. 1 year ago, David thought I was small and worthless. Today, he works for a company I own, in a building I bought, under the supervision of a woman whose career I built while he was tearing her down. If that's not justice, I don't know what is. Thanks for following this absolutely insane journey, you guys. To anyone who's been told they're not good enough, not successful enough, not worthy of love, remember that your value isn't determined by other people's opinions or achievements. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are just waiting for you to prove you deserve it. Those people don't deserve you. And hey, if you enjoyed this story of ultimate success and justice served cold, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Viral Family Tales for more incredible true stories. We post new content every day, so hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below if you think David got exactly what he deserved, or if you have your own story of proving the doubters wrong. Thanks for watching, and remember, success is the best revenge, but humbling your enemies while achieving it is even better.